Welcome to episode 73 of the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. Today I sat down with Dr. Craig Heller from Stanford and Chief Fred Kauser, and we talked about a product called CoolMitt. But more specifically, we talked about the importance of cooling firefighters on the fire ground and cooling athletes to enable them to perform better. Now, after we signed off with the call, Dr. Heller actually pointed out that the reason we don't use cold buckets of ice water to cool our hands in the manner that they're speaking of is that it's simply too cold. That would cause vasoconstriction in the hands and not effectively cool the core. And so the idea of the CoolMitt product, it is the coldest temperature that will work without that reflexive vasoconstriction. I know you're going to love this episode. Please give me a rating and share it with someone who will enjoy it. Thank you for joining me on the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, AZ. I find the research and resources and then provide the fire service with the so what, now what, to ensure the health and well-being of every member of our profession. Together, let's thrive. Hello, podcast guest. It's AZ back with yet another episode of the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. And today I am joined by Dr. Craig Heller and Chief Fred Kauser. How are you today, gentlemen?
Great.
Awesome.
Yeah, doing excited to be here.
Yeah, good to see you.
I'm excited to be a good host. And before we get to sort of some introductions, I want to explain how we got to where we are. 2 years ago at the NSCA Tactical Annual Conference, I had the chance to meet, I call him the other Craig, from the company called CoolMitt. And we talked a lot about cooling military and firefighters. And of course, he got my attention with the firefighters thing. And so he wasn't quite ready at that time to talk about the product and how it could be really important to our firefighters, but we're ready now. So first off, Dr. Craig, can you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a professor of biology at Stanford. I've been here for a very long time. And over that time, I've done research on lots of different things, but a main theme has been temperature regulation. And that has taken me into studying all sorts of different kinds of animals, everything from little desert pocket mice to harbor seals in the Arctic. And even now, we have a project ongoing in bears, hibernation in bears. So I've looked at temperature regulation in all sorts of organisms, but I came to humans through a bet.
Stop it.
A friend who is an anesthesiologist challenged me one time. He said, "You think you know so much about temperature regulation. I bet you couldn't solve a problem we have in the recovery room." Well, what's that? Patients come out of surgery very cold.
Yes.
And it takes the nurses hours to get them to stop shivering. It's a trivial problem. No, it's a very hard problem. And the reason is, if you are cold, you're hypothermic, we say, and you're coming out of anesthesia, you tightly vasoconstrict. Your blood vessels close down to keep the blood and the heat in the core of your body. So you can't get heat across the skin. The skin is a very good insulator. So we discovered a technique in which we put a limb in a negative pressure, a slight vacuum, that pulled more blood into that limb. We heated the limb with a pad, a hospital pad, and that sent the hot blood back into the core of the body. And it worked beautifully. And then we found out it really had nothing to do with the arm. It was only the hand. And that took us into the old anatomy literature. And we discovered that in certain skin areas, which we call non-hairy skin that doesn't have hair follicles. Now, we are not really hairy beings, but we still have the same type of skin that our mammalian relatives have that have fur. So if you have fur, you can't lose heat over a body surface. So mammals have evolved these special blood vessels in the skin areas that don't have hair. And that was our discovery, that we were using these heat loss structures in reverse to get heat into the body. And it worked beautifully. It took less than 10 minutes to rewarm a patient coming out of surgery. So we started working then on the real function of these structures, and that is heat loss. So we had to have someone hot in order to extract heat from the body and find out what were the optimum conditions. So our lab assistant was a gym rat. He would go to the gym every night after work and he would do a workout. We said, why don't you do your workout in the lab? Use that to get overheated, and then we'll use you to experiment with how we can best extract that heat. So he did pull-ups, and he used to do, at that time, a lot of pull-ups. And what we found was that over a period of 6 weeks, in which we were having him do 10 sets of pull-ups to muscle failure, just to get him overheated, and then we'd cool him at the end of the 10 sets. And one day, for no reason, he went back to the pull-up bar after we cooled him, and he did the same number of pull-ups as in his first set. And we said, holy crow, what does this mean? This means that the muscle fatigue is largely due to the rise in temperature of the muscle. A muscle that's working is producing heat, a lot of heat. And there is a fail-safe mechanism that shuts that muscle off to prevent thermal damage to the muscle itself. So we started cooling him after every other set of pull-ups, and lo and behold, his performance went up dramatically. And then in the next 6 weeks, he tripled his capacity for pull-ups. Now, let me tell you what those numbers were. At the very beginning of this work, he was doing 100 pull-ups, which is quite remarkable. At the end of the first 6 weeks, he was up to 180 pull-ups, which is quite remarkable. But after we started cooling him, at the end of the next 6 weeks, the number was 618. So what we discovered essentially, and this is important for firefighters who like to stay fit, and in general in their firehouses, they have gym equipment and they use that gym equipment in the hours they have, but they certainly don't want to then have to be called out when they're totally muscle fatigued. Okay? So what this approach allows you to do is to greatly increase your work volume without putting you in a condition that you are just frankly fatigued, pooped out. So
that is absolutely incredible. And before we get to the chief to let him introduce himself, I need to know, how much was the bet and did you collect?
Actually, I guess it never had a monetary value.
Oh, it was one of those things. You said, hold my beer, and then you solved the problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry, that was more of an introduction than you needed, Fred.
No, that was perfect.
Please chip in.
No, I loved it. Well, thank you. So 39 years in the business for me, frontline, through the ranks. I retired as a fire chief just this year, just a few months ago. And, during that period of time, I've been able to experience all of the things that structural firefighting induces to the human body, from, the all of the exercise conditions and the stressors, the heat, the mental health, the sleep deprivation. And so my entire career, and as I became a fire chief, I was really concerned about my staff and, kind of the impact on their bodies and, the health risks that are just inherent to the nature of our work. During that same period of time, the nature of firefighting and the nature of fires shifted incredibly due to the shift in the materials that are being used inside of our homes today. When I started, it was probably less than 50-50, polymers and plastics and those hydrocarbon-based materials. And today it's much higher, which changes the speed and the veracity of what the fire ground looks like today. And at the same time, I was watching, a big shift in fitness and wellness, and we've just made great strides in our industry. And two things really troubled me. One was the lack of quality information, and you described that before we started talking, and that led me to pursue some academic pursuits to help me understand how to sift through and find the truth, the best truth we have, and to help me make understanding of the amount of work that is already available that we already know, but just hasn't been translated to our industry yet. And that was really important to me. I wanted to not just get to the truth, but to get to a place where I could translate it, where it could be useful, to those of us in the field who, quite frankly, want to keep it as simple as we can, right? That's the nature of who we are. And the second thing that really troubled me was what I believed was a lack of progress in health and wellness, and that we just hadn't made enough of the quantum leap. And I'm watching, real athletes and real physical performers doing things that are probably not any different than a firefighter, but recovering and sustaining a life that is better than ours. And so it led me on this path to kind of understand that. And so I met CoolMitt 2 years ago at a conference as a fire chief, and I was wowed by the science. I understood the science behind the product. And for the first time, I felt like we might have something here that would represent a quantum leap, and that really might make a difference. And so I came on the team, and my job really, it's an amazing team of professionals, and I came on the team to help them, not only translate the science and the information to our industry, but they're really interested in the application and how it's adopted, by firefighters. As you are already aware, and this is my area of study, I study the space between knowing and doing. And in high-risk occupations, we tend to be reserved. It's the opposite of what we think. People think we're risk takers, when in fact we're actually not.
Right.
We're actually, we prefer to do what we've always done until it doesn't work, and it gets us in so much trouble. And so CoolMitt has asked me to come on board to participate in what I believe is just going to be continuous ongoing research in field use of these devices, which have been deployed, by the way. And I'd love to talk to you about that, and a study that we concluded recently, a pilot in Homewood, Alabama. But that's kind of a little bit about me and who I am and how I got here.
Well, Fred, you probably didn't plan on this, but I think you and I just became best friends, because that's exactly what I'm trying to do. Translate the science, give them the so what, now what. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, let's pass the mic back to Craig. And Craig, I want to tell you, probably 5, maybe 10 years ago, time just marches on.
Yeah,
my department purchased these, they're basically chairs in a bag.
Yep.
And then you put your arms through these little sleeves, and they were supposed to cool us. Now, you already addressed in your introduction a little bit why that wouldn't work that well. But let's dig in just a little bit more. Let's talk about the hairy versus non-hairy skin, and why sticking your arms in this chair is not an effective way to cool our firefighters.
Well, let me just give you a very simple analogy for the arms. Now, if you also put your hand in, great, you'll get a benefit. But if your car is overheated and you have a garden hose, would you spray the tubes going in and out of the radiator, or would you spray the radiator? Okay, it's a matter of surface area that facilitates the heat loss. So the arm, they're the tubes going to and from these radiators right here. Okay, so that's now what about the rest of the body? We think that, we just take off our clothes and we go into a convective airstream and that'll take care of all the heat problems. Well, yes and no. The overall body surface is not a good heat exchanger. It's a good insulator. Our skin is actually a very good insulator. So you say, well, okay, but when I'm overheated, I send more blood to the skin. I can see it, it gets red. Well, it's actually only a small difference, and it's to support the sweat glands. Okay. Now, sweating is a very effective way of losing heat if the sweat evaporates on the skin. But if it drops off the skin, it's done you no good other than dehydrate you. Okay? So it's important to think that different parts of the body play different roles in regulating our body temperature. The thermostat is in the brain. Okay? And the brain is getting information from the skin. So let me give you another analogy. If you wanted to cool your house, would you put a cold cloth over the thermostat? No. So by cooling the overall skin surface, you're sending a cold signal into the thermostat, and that is shutting off the radiators. So we've actually seen situations where we've had people exercising, like on a fixed bike, and we cool the skin with an air vest or an ice vest, and they'll, oh, this feels so good. This feels so great. And at the same time, their core temperature is going up steeply. So there are places that are good for sensing the environment, and there are places that are good for dumping heat to the environment. Now, one of the things that people report with using CoolMitt is, well, I don't feel cool. No, you don't, because you don't sense your core body temperature. You sense your skin temperature. Okay? But you say, well, look, you stopped sweating. Oh, yeah, I did. I stopped sweating. And then they go back to doing whatever they were doing, and they're refreshed. They're energized. They can do much more than they would have had they not extracted heat. So, it's hard sometimes to convince people that this is an effective mechanism when indeed they don't feel cool, but they feel refreshed. So our football team, for example, if they're playing in a hot place, what they will do is when they come off the field with a turnover of sides, they will then cool, stick their hands in the CoolMitt. And then when they go back on the field, they're energized, they're fresh again. So that's a big difference. Now, turning to firefighters, the turnout gear is really good at protecting from heat, but it also is very good at retaining heat. So the heat that you're generating doing hard work, that has to get out. So when you insulate the body from things on the outside, you're also impeding the loss of heat from the inside. And that's why core temperature can go up very, very fast. So we've done a lot of experiments in military biochemical warfare suits, which are incredibly impermeable. And so we can have someone working in a hot room in the biochemical warfare suit, and if we are extracting heat from a hand, their core temperature doesn't go up, or it doesn't go up as fast.
I'm just thinking about, I told you about our chairs with the arms, but even maybe a few years before that, our hospital did us a real big favor, and they got these little vests, that we would get out of the refrigerator. So when we transported to the hospital on a hot summer day, we could put the vest on while we were writing our reports. And now I'm understanding that was not helping us at all.
Well, it feel good.
Yeah, it did feel good. A nice cold drink and a cold vest.
Then I bet when you took it off, you started sweating dramatically.
And is this also the reason that after I do a physical fitness training and I'm hot and sweaty and I go take a cool shower, I still sweat?
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. Exactly.
So many people who experience this, they go out and they exercise, they jog or what have you. They're all sweaty. They come in and they have to get ready quickly for a dinner party. So they take a cold shower and they get dressed quickly, and then boom, they break out in sweat.
Oh my goodness. Well, let's pass the mic to the chief for a moment and let's talk about, so this product could be absolutely incredible for the fire service. A quick, when you come out for a bottle change, I'm imagining taking off my gloves,
Yep.
putting my hands on the surfaces, and while my bottle's getting changed by someone else, I'm cool and ready to go. So let's talk about some language that we can use that will make chiefs understand, or people, decision makers, understand how important and effective this could be.
Yeah, that's a great question, Az. I'm going to touch just for a second on what Dr. Heller pointed out, and that is how easy it is to um, misunderstand the feedback that you're getting from the environment and make a mistake and make things worse. And how often, do we see that? And I wonder now, how many opportunities were missed to prevent an injury or something serious because we just simply didn't know. And I think one of the key takeaways today here is that firefighters are so dependent on their senses, and yet the senses that regulate body temperature, which then are reporting, giving the body instructions on what to do about it, are in contradiction with what we believe is happening. And so we have to unpack that and correct that. So I hope we come back to that again with Dr. Heller. And so the question is, how do we convince the firefighter that what they're doing isn't working by cooling the skin? So there has to be a message around that. We know this now in this conversation. We have the assumptions. It's irrefutable. Now the question is, how do we press against 200 years of tradition unimpeded by progress? Right, one of our great taglines. Right. So,
Yes.
and what we find in firefighter behavioral learning, it's much deeper than that. It is at the individual level. We work independently together. And so the power of my individual independent firefighter perspective is equally as powerful as someone else's who's in the same business, and they may or may not be the same. And you have to convince me independently. Now, if we have a strong chief, if we have an influencer in the business, someone who is a champion who can help convey these messages, we find that that's helpful in the American Fire Services to try, to shift perspective and to be open to adoption. The application of this is, to your point, is incredible. And to my knowledge, it's the only non-invasive, meaning you're not getting wet, you're not getting dirty, you're not asked to do anything. You don't even have to take off your PPE, which is a really relevant point here as one of the conditions and use cases for CoolMitt. And we don't know of any other non-invasive, easy to use, well-engineered product that can cool the core of the body. Whether they feel it or not, the core within 2, 3, 4 minutes is absolutely being positively impacted. And so the areas that we see this, being important is, obviously what we do every day in terms of just routine working out exercise routines in the gym. And, one of the major concerns that I've always had as an administrator, and the things that we've encountered are, injuries while working out and lost time. But here's the deal: within an hour, they're going to go to work. They're going to a fire. They're going to an auto accident. They're going to use the same muscles. So what we find is we hear them all the time. Well, I kind of slow down on my workout. I'm not working out as hard because I work tomorrow. And the very purpose of working out is to increase strength, endurance, flexibility. So we think the exercise, location is a great place to intermittently use CoolMitt. We think that the training environment, And there's a couple of groups in the training environment. There's the instructional group that generally doesn't get undressed. So we'll get a CoolMitt up by their staging point so they can come out. They leave all their things on, pop off a glove, and they're being cooled while they're preparing, waiting that 2 to 3 minutes to go back in and serve as a lighter, an instructor, observer in a training environment. And then you've got the trainees, even if they're young, the condensed academy experience requires multiple evolutions a day, every single day for 6 weeks to 6 months. And so that kind of repetitive strengthening, conditioning, and kind of muscle memory and the skill sets is also a great application. Then, of course, 1584, the standard on rehabilitation, was designed for health and safety on the fire ground. It has not, to my knowledge, and does not appear to have arrived at a place where it understands fully the relationship between rehabilitation and core temperature. And therefore, the interventions that are currently available, honestly, just have not been able to meet the need. And so, rehabilitation on the fire ground is complicated because now we're expecting, some kind of decontamination phase, which means I don't get to come out like I used to and drop my stuff and begin the process of evacuating some heat. I have to stay in it while I'm going through this initial, gross, decontamination stage. That's a perfect application because they could begin cooling while they're dressed. And then, of course, that firefighters through rehabilitation could be asked to go back in, or 8 hours later could find themselves on another emergency. So the need and the frequency and intensity of the activity that's imposed on a firefighter, and the need to get their core temperature down as quickly as possible, just isn't possible with what we have available today. And that's really been the target. And those are the opportunities where I think we can make a difference in the health and safety of our firefighters.
That's an incredible perspective. Thank you very much for that. It made it very clear. And while you were speaking, I thought of a question. I understand that the body is very tightly controlled, homeostasis, pH, temperature, everything is tightly controlled.
Yeah.
What, Dr. Craig, what is that tightly controlled core temperature? And this is going to be a 3-parter. Sorry, bad host. What is that tightly controlled core temperature? What is too high? When is it becoming dangerous? And then how fast can we cool that down with the CoolMitt product?
Yeah. Well, everybody knows the magic numbers for 98.6, right? It may not be.
Except me.
98.6 Fahrenheit. But that is not exactly true for everybody all the time. So we use centigrade in the lab. So we say, 37 degrees centigrade, that's normal body temperature. But it changes across the day. During the day when you're active, it may go up to 37.5. At night when you go to sleep, it goes down, maybe down to 35.5 or 36. So that's the normal range. Now, when you get up to 38.5 to 39, you begin to have the effects of heat illness. Essentially, your cognition goes down. Your ability to function goes down. And when you get up to 40, which is the equivalent of a pretty serious fever, then you are even more impaired. And by the time you get to 41, 42, you are then borderline heat stroke. So we live on the edge. We live on the edge of thermal death. And we get a lot of efficiency from having a high body temperature, but then we are in the danger of going over that limit due to heavy work or hot environments. People don't realize that if you think of environments around the world, a temperature of around 35 degrees, which is below body temperature, at 100% humidity is lethal. because you cannot lose your internal body heat that you're generating. So without any kind of technology, living in warm environments that are also humid really puts people at risk. And firefighters are essentially experiencing this to the nth degree, because under the personal protective equipment, the humidity is 100%.
Oh.
And the temperature, of course, is also rising. Now, let me just go back and clarify one thing about your questions about the cooling of the arm and so forth. One of the pushbacks that I frequently get is that, well, the NCAA recommends ice bath immersion for borderline heat stroke. Great, that's super. Ice bath immersion it does a terrific job at extracting heat because you're covering so much of your body surface. You're overcoming the insulative properties of the skin. So the only problem is you don't always have an ice bath available. So, and certainly firefighters between going in and out of the fire, they are not going to be able to disrobe and get into an ice bath. So being able to extract heat from these focal places on the body surface, they are the soles of the feet, the palms of the hands, and the upper part of the face above the beard line. Okay, these are the skin areas that have these specialized blood vessels that are there specifically to dissipate heat. If you go to the gym, you can see right away people are red in the face. Okay. Also, you meet a friend, you shake your friend's hand, you know that friend's thermal status right away.
My thermal status is usually hot and sweaty, although, interestingly enough, when I have my temperature taken, it's always in the 97s.
Okay.
Very strange. As you were talking about the thermal regulation, my wheels got turning, and I want to toss this one to Fred because I think I know the answer already, and I think you're going to agree with me, but I just want to make sure. Here's some backstory. I have been campaigning, if you will, very hard on my social media and my email lists, attempting to educate firefighters about the dangers of doing physical fitness training in their structural firefighting gear. From the angle of you are exposing yourself to carcinogens unnecessarily, but even if you were not exposing yourself to carcinogens, it is not the most efficient way to train. You're not going to get the same benefits of deadlifting in your fire gear or trying to do snatches or pull-ups in your fire gear as you would just simply doing it in the gym and then going and doing some job tasks. But let's now address this from the overheating aspect. My guess, I hope you're going to say I'm right, my guess is your training is going to be less efficient simply because you are overheating. Am I correct?
Yeah, I'm going to take a shot at that. I'm going to go back to what Dr. Heller teed up, and that is the effect of overheating not only impacts muscle availability, muscle, its ability to perform work in terms of, strength, flexibility, all of the things that the muscle is designed to do. But if you think through this, and I'm going to tag into some of the NIOSH reports that we read, but think about this. What do you think happens to fine motor skills? What happens to form? What happens to cognitive processing and decision making, right? So think about, the downstream impact of being hyperthermic, legitimately hyperthermic. And here's the deal. What happens when you're chronically hyperthermic, right? What happens over the course of 5, 10, 15 years of having these bouts of, heating up your core so much that, that it's causing these negative effects. And so it absolutely, what you're saying plays out logically, that if form was important and muscle memory was important, which is where I come from in my world of, training and development and knowing and learning, The difference really is through experience, and you want those experiences to be as quality as possible. And so if you're going to go to the gym and work out in your turnout gear, you absolutely run the risk of not having a quality experience in either way, in either creating a simulated environment that could apply to the firefight or some rescue operation, or I think likewise you could argue that the muscle memory could be risked and your form would be not what it needed to be. And then here's the challenge. And I want to get back to the words I would say to another fire chief, or really anybody who cares about this, and that is, we've got to cool the core. We've got to stop cooling the skin. That's as simple as possible. Cool the core. If we shifted our focus on cooling the core, then we would look at the challenges or the interventions that we offer would be very different. And so it's just interesting how our senses, which wrongly led us to believe that it was our skin that was important to us and that how we felt was in fact helping us, when in fact it was not, which then leads us to develop consensus-based standards that are based on profoundly inaccurate science. And so cool the core is the message today. And I think, to your point, I think you're spot on when you take that step by step, working out in turnout gear and getting hyperthermic and then grabbing the weights to get your maximum reps seems like it could be a challenge.
Well, it simply decreases your work volume. And in order to have a conditioning effect, you have to increase your work volume. That's what you do when you go to the gym and you try to do one more rep. That's increasing your work volume. You overheat, your work volume goes down.
Amen. Preach it louder. So, Craig, I want to know what are the long-term effects of this chronic hyperthermia? Is there a consequence for people that continually overheat themselves?
I must say that I don't know. I've never come across any sort of a epidemiological or clinical study. They may exist, but I just don't know. Of course, what you're doing is every time you do experience hyperthermia, you are doing damage to tissues in the body, and they have to be regenerated. So I really, really can't give you any knowledge.
Anecdotally, my mother, who has MS, experienced
heat. My wife has MS.
Yeah, she experienced, I would say, heat exhaustion at one point.
Yeah.
And she's very, very sensitive to heat now. And also anecdotally, I do not have MS, but I find that I am much more sensitive to heat as I'm growing older. So maybe I need to dig into that research.
Well, definitely for MS. We've had a lot of experience with MS patients. For some reason which is not understood, multiple sclerosis makes people much more sensitive to temperature. And if their body temperature or even the environmental temperature goes up a little bit, whatever their symptoms are, they're exacerbated. If it's vision, the vision goes. If it's locomotion, balance and locomotion goes. But if they use CoolMitt, they can be back out in the summer playing golf. We've seen that in a number of cases. It has a dramatic effect. Now, of course, it doesn't cure the disease. It just alleviates the symptoms. And eventually, if someone is progressive MS, they will get to the point where they're not mobile at all. So it's not going to be a problem for them. But for people that have MS for a large portion of their lives, their quality of life can be increased.
Hey, Z, could I provide a comment?
Yeah.
Of course.
So, Dr. Heller and I recently had a conversation that just is a perfect segue into what was just discussed, and that is that although we don't know the chronic effect, we can imagine that there is some kind of an effect downstream. But here was an interesting conversation. I asked him the question because I have the belief, no pain, no gain. So then I coupled that with, well, what is my core temperature 12, 14 hours after I came back from a fire, after I came back from the academy, after I went home? And could that affect my sleep? And his response was not what I expected. So,
and what was that response?
What
Let's
were
hear
you
it.
expecting?
I'm going to let him. Well, I had the belief that if it didn't hurt, if I wasn't sore, that I wasn't going to gain strength or muscle mass and I wasn't going to get more fit. I have the belief that it's got to hurt, and it's got to hurt. The longer it hurts, the better I am because of it. And then I've had the belief that that temperature and how my internal core temperature. I didn't know that could impact my sleep quality, which is a problem in the American Fire Service.
So those are two different issues. Definitely hyperthermia or experiencing high body temperatures, especially in the afternoon, can impair your sleep. So, what is the best environment for sleep? It's cool. And the reason is that your body is trying to regulate at a lower level during sleep. So if you start out at a higher level, it's going to take longer to get that core temperature back down so that it's not a disturbance. Now, the soreness you mentioned, this is what's called the delayed onset muscle soreness, that you do a really heavy workout and then a day later you're really sore. And people say, well, that's good because that's your muscles regenerating. That is the biggest myth imaginable. And with our experiments and with our use of cooling, Palmer cooling, we'll have, for example, an athlete or a military personnel. All of a sudden, on one day, when they use this, they double their workout. Okay, literally, they can double their workout. And they always say, I just wait for them to say it. They say, I'm going to be so sore tomorrow. And they never are. So the soreness has something to do with the rise in temperature of the muscle. And we are actually doing research right now on what is causing muscle soreness and why it is eliminated or alleviated by the use of intermittent cooling.
Bodybuilders all over the country are mad at you right now. They love the sore.
Well, if you love the sore, go ahead. But it's not doing you any good.
So I think you might be the best one to answer this. I was gifted a product called the Chili Sleep, which is a mat for my bed that I can temperature control. And it has tremendously helped my sleep. And I was wondering if we could get them for the department. It was just cost prohibitive. But what if we had a set of CoolMitts in the dorm and everyone cooled their hands before they hit the rack? Do you think that would improve their sleep, since declining body temperature is a prerequisite for good sleep? What do you think?
The evidence is irrefutable, no question, without any hesitation. If you play through the science that Dr. Heller explained, CoolMitt is a legitimate product from that science. So it's being applied at the right places on the body. It's at the right temperature, and it's being delivered it essentially functions like a radiator. The heat is being transferred out of the body. The liquid that flows through the mitt is then goes through a cooling chamber and essentially it's condensed out. And so what you get is a core cooling effect. And in our experiences, if I could take a couple of minutes and you tell me when it's ready, I want to tell you a little bit about a pilot study we did in Alabama that relates to this. And what we're finding is that in 3 or 4 minutes, you can experience a significant impact on your core body temperature by using the mitt. They're very easy to set up and very easy to use. We're already developing the next generations. They're already out, right? I'm sure you've already seen that, but they're already out and in use. And but a bunk room, really any place in the firehouse. Environmentally, there's sections of the country where it's just warm all the time. In the South, and so these things are so portable. They can be put any place in the firehouse, and anyone could just slip their hand in, use it for 3 or 4 minutes, get refreshed, and go on about whatever else they were doing. So you could use it intermittently throughout the day. Certainly use it at sleep time. Even hours after you came back from a fire, it would be very appropriate to continue to work on core cooling. But the good news is it only takes a few minutes to get the benefit of that particular dose of cooling. And Dr. Heller can probably stress out, explain that a little bit more.
Well, the thing is that the large volumes of blood that can flow through these vessels, if you cool that large volume of blood, that goes right back to the heart. And then from the heart, the cooling gets sent out to the muscles that are working. So you're cooling from the inside out, not from the outside in. From the outside in, you have to cool all of the tissues between the surface and the blood. And here, the blood is right close to this exchange surface. So that's why it's effective. You're cooling from the inside out.
And following the logic of what was said before, if you laid on a cool mat at night, wouldn't that just turn your thermostat? Wouldn't that shift your thermostat and you would, in fact, become warmer?
Well, you're also benefiting from the perception of being cool. So the mat is not going to be so cool that you're going to actually cause a rise in body temperature. What I was talking about were situations in which, people are producing a lot of internal heat. When you're sleeping, you're not going to produce a lot of internal heat. So the mat is mainly comfort, not heat exchange.
Maybe I need both. Menopause is rough. Well, I want to be very respectful of your time, and one of the last things I'm going to ask will be for Fred, how would someone get in contact to buy the products? But before we do that, let's give Dr. Craig one last chance. Was there anything that I should have asked or you wish that we would have discussed? The mic is yours.
Oh, my goodness.
I know, it's overwhelming.
That's all I can say is that every time we have got someone to use it and they're skeptical, we just say, try it, do it. And for anyone who's using it with respect to their physical conditioning, we say, look at your numbers, keep track of your numbers, and then see what the difference is. And that convinces them instantaneously. we want, and I do this frequently with athletic coaches because athletic coaches turn over quite rapidly. So I always have to re-educate. And the best way to educate is to say, try it yourself.
And what I'm hearing is the reason I can't do 600 pull-ups is because I haven't been cooling my core temperature enough.
Well, the other thing is it's not a magic.
Oh, shoot.
So if you start out at a very low level of physical conditioning, you are not heat limited. So it's when you get to the point where your muscles are producing enough heat that your core temperature is rising. That's when you get the benefit. So
Details.
I'm sure you could easily get into that. Well, let me give you one example.
Okay.
A couple months ago, our women's soccer team were traveling to Arizona for a semifinal game. Okay. Everybody said, oh, the Stanford women, they will never survive that. They can't possibly, they're not acclimated. The Arizona women, during that game, a large number, I don't remember how many, I think it was 8 of the Arizona women went down due to heat. None of the Stanford women. They were using
Stanford women rule.
they were using CoolMitt.
That's incredible.
The benefit there was that because it was a very hot day, the NCAA rules say that you have to have a water break every 15 minutes. So they were cooling during their water breaks. And that's very similar to firefighters coming in and out of a fire, right?
That's amazing. Well, Fred, I'm going to first ask you, were there any topics that we should have dug down into that I missed the mark?
No, not at all. I'm super grateful that you care about these things. And I appreciate that you took the time to understand the science behind it, and you're willing to, help find the words and the language to get the attention. We again are so distracted by what we've always done, and we sometimes the steps we take to try to make things better are just based on incomplete or sometimes bad information. And so I hope you can drive that mission, and you'll help get that message out that core cooling is really what we're striving for. That's the difference. It's not skin cooling. It's not how we necessarily feel when we take our things off. We really have to get to the core, and it's on the inside. That's where this heat is. That's where it's going to cause the most harm. This is where it's preventing us from being able to physically perform, to use our fine motor skills, and certainly to make good decisions. You have to think this thing. You wonder why fire officers and firefighters, when you read these reports, you wonder why in the world did they do that? Well, we might know, or at least have another idea about why that might be going on. And so intermittent use of these devices, and using them as quickly and as possible following one of these high energy events, I think I'm convinced will have a profound impact on the American fire services. So thank you for your work, and thanks for having us here. I only wanted to mention, if your listeners go to CoolMitt.com, there's a firefighter section where we've got some good study information there. It talks a little bit about all of the applications. This has a military application. It has an industrial application. It's already been launched in the elite athlete environment, and it is on its way into the American Fire Services. And we did a pilot study in Homewood, Alabama, and the findings were precisely on track with the work that was found in previous studies. That simply using 3 minutes of CoolMitt between activities produced a 2.5 to 3 times faster recovery for those firefighters versus the firefighters who were using passive cooling techniques, which is what we use, the vests and the fans and the towels. So they were getting, 2 to 3 times the immediate benefit. But here's what was really powerful, was that when you looked at all of their performance over all of the circuits, that those who used the CoolMitt intermittently had a lower heart rate, thereby a lower core temperature through the entire circuit, just as Dr. Heller described as the soccer teams and others who have found the same thing. So not that firefighters are any different, but sometimes we think we are. And sometimes we need to know. I have a lot more confidence when firefighters are using and wearing and trying certain pieces of equipment. And in this case, this was a really powerful pilot. We have an active pilot going on over in one of the large county systems in Virginia that's active right now. And this company is really committed to not necessarily proving anything out. There's nothing to prove out. The technology works. What we're working on now is how to get it in hands of the firefighters who are influential, who want to make a difference, want to see a change, and understand what core cooling can do for our enterprise. So, thank you again.
Annette,
Of course.
I could add one more thing that might be useful
Let's do it.
for your audience, and that is how to use something they already have in their toolbox, and that's these chemical cooling packs.
Okay.
So the standard of care is that you put them in the axilla,
Yes.
the groin, and the neck.
No.
No, we've done a study and we've used the packs exactly that way. And then we have replicated the experiment by putting them on the palms of the hands, the soles of the feet, and the face. The rate of recovery was double.
Putting it in the armpits, axilla, and groin, axilla, groin, and face
So
is actually in our medical orders for heat exhaustion.
Yeah, but you can double the rate of recovery by putting them on the glabrous skin, the non-hairy skin. So that's just something without without having CoolMitt might be useful.
Edward Hospital, I need to talk to you about our standing medical orders. Listeners, I'm going to link, Dr. Craig sent me some great papers prior to our podcast. I'm actually going to put links to those in the show notes. Please note that also Fred stated there's a whole firefighter section on the CoolMitt website, which I'll also put in the show notes. But Fred, if someone's listening today, a chief or a decision maker, and they're like, we have got to try this, is the website where they would get the product?
The website is a great place to start, but you can provide my personal, my telephone number and my email address at CoolMitt as well. We have an evaluation program. The product, you'll be shocked at how inexpensive the product is. And we have evaluation kits and units available if someone wants to try one out for 30 days or so. Provide my email address and we'll arrange that with them.
I will absolutely do that. That sounds like a great opportunity for departments. Gentlemen, this has been a conversation a long time in the coming, and I'm glad we finally got this one on the books. It's been my pleasure to have you, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.